The morning Lydia Graves laid her late husband's tools out along the roadside. The dust was blowing sideways across the Kansas plains, and her hands would not stop shaking. She had been up since before dawn, dragging the heavy iron pieces out of the barn one by one, setting them in a row along the split-rail fence that bordered the south road leading into Harlow Creek. Every chisel, every hand plane, every wooden mallet, every spoke shave and drawknife and brace and bit, all of it arranged with a care that felt almost like ceremony, because she supposed in a way it was. She had told herself the night before that she would not cry when she did this. She had made herself that promise while standing in the barn doorway with the lantern held high, looking at everything Thomas had built and collected and polished over 16 years of marriage. She had made the promise, and she had almost kept it, right up until she picked up the small folding rule that Thomas always kept in his breast pocket, the one with the brass hinges worn thin from use, and then the promise had dissolved entirely. The year was 1878. The town of Harlow Creek, Kansas, sat 2 miles north of where Lydia's farm road met the main stage road, and it was on that junction she had placed herself and her husband's tools before the sun had fully crested the low ridge to the east. She was 31 years old, a widow of 4 months, and the back taxes on her 40 acres had come due, with a notice she had found nailed to her door post on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago. The number on that notice had been so much larger than anything she kept in the tin box under the floorboards that she had sat down on the porch step and simply stared at the distant tree line until the feeling in her legs came back. She had a daughter, Clara, who was 9 years old and presently asleep in the farmhouse behind her. She had a milk cow named Bess, a mule named Porter, 4 laying hens, and a kitchen garden that had done poorly this year on account of the dry spell. She had Thomas's tools, which were good quality tools, the best he had been able to afford over years of careful saving, and which she could not use herself and could not bear to look at every day and could not afford to keep. So here she was. She had written the price of each item in chalk on a small piece of dark board and propped it against each tool. The prices were fair. She had asked old Amos Fletcher at the hardware store in town what the tools were worth, and he had told her, and she had priced every item exactly at what Amos said, not a penny more, not a penny less, because she wanted them gone quickly and she wanted to feel she had not cheated anyone out of what was right. The first hour brought nothing but the wind and a wagon full of hay that did not slow down. The driver gave her a brief look and then looked away in the manner of someone who recognizes grief and wants no part of catching it. She understood that. She had done the same thing once, before she knew what it was to stand on the other side of it. The second hour brought a family in a buckboard, a woman with 2 small boys squeezed in beside her, heading south. The woman slowed the horses and looked at the tools with an expression that was genuinely interested, but her boys were squirming, and she had somewhere to be, and after a moment she clicked her tongue and drove on with an apologetic wave that Lydia returned. By mid-morning, the sun had fully committed to being brutal, and Lydia had used up both the water in her canteen and most of her available composure. She was sitting on the fence post, her dark skirt pulled up just enough to keep from trailing in the dust, her dark hair pinned but coming loose in the wind, when she heard the sound of hooves coming from the north at a pace that was neither hurrying nor dawdling, but had a steadiness to it that she found herself paying attention to without knowing why. He came around the slight bend in the road at a canter, a big bay horse moving with easy power, and the man on the horse sat in the saddle the way men sit when they have been doing it so long, the horse and the man have become one continuous thought. He wore a brown canvas duster, trail-worn and pale at the shoulders from the sun. His hat was dark and pulled low. There was a bedroll behind his saddle and a rifle scabbard along the right side, and the kind of general road dust on everything that meant he had been riding for more than a day. He would have passed. She could see from his posture that he was looking at the road ahead, not at her, and in another few seconds the bay horse would have carried him past the fence and past the tools and past her entirely. But then his eyes dropped from the road, and they found the row of tools along the fence, and something in the way he sat shifted, just slightly, the way a man shifts when he has seen something that requires a closer look. He brought the horse to a stop. He sat there for a moment in the saddle, looking at the tools the way a man looks at something he recognizes. Then he swung down with a single fluid motion, wrapped the reins loose around the fence post at the far end, and walked toward her. Up close he was taller than she had estimated, broad through the shoulders, with a jaw that carried several days of dark beard and eyes that were a clear, steady gray. He was not old. She would have guessed 34, maybe 35, though she was not always good at guessing. He stopped at the first tool in the line, which was a mortise chisel with a boxwood handle, and he picked it up and turned it over in his hands. "Good balance," he said. He was not talking to her particularly, he was talking to the chisel. "My husband took care of his tools," Lydia said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "He always said a tool that is well cared for will outlast the man who owns it." The man glanced up at her. Something moved in his gray eyes, a quality of attention that was quiet but complete, as though she had said something worth hearing. "Wise man," he said. "He was," she said. He set the chisel down carefully and moved to the next item, which was a smoothing plane, Stanley No. 4. The iron sharp enough to raise a curl from a pine board even now. He tested the iron with his thumb, not pressing hard, just feeling the edge, and nodded once. "How long has he been gone?" he asked. He asked it without looking at her, still looking at the plane, and the directness of the question without the cruelty that could have been in it made her breath come a little short. 4 months, she said. "Fever. It took him in 3 days. The doctor in Harlow Creek said there was nothing to be done." The man set the plane down. He turned and looked at her directly now, fully, and there was nothing prying in the look and nothing dismissive. It was simply the look of a person who has heard a hard thing and is allowing it to be hard. "I am sorry," he said. "That is a terrible short time for a fever to do that kind of work." "It is," she said. "He was strong. Everyone always said how strong Thomas was." A silence held between them that was not uncomfortable, which surprised her because she had found almost every silence since Thomas died to be uncomfortable, full of the things that were no longer being said by the person who used to say them. "My name is Raymond Atkins," the man said. He touched the brim of his hat. "I am riding through from Dodge City, heading down to Wichita, and I had not planned to stop today." "Lydia Graves," she said. She did not offer her hand because ladies did not, and she was aware that even here in the dust of a Kansas roadside she was still conducting herself according to the rules of what was done, because the rules were the only thing currently keeping her upright. "If you are in a hurry, I understand." "I was not in a particular hurry," Raymond Atkins said. "Not the urgent kind." He turned back to the tools and worked his way down the row with the focused attention of someone who genuinely knew what he was looking at. He handled each item the way Thomas had handled them, which was to say he handled them as instruments rather than objects, things made to serve a purpose and worthy of respect on that account. She watched him and felt something strange, something that was grief and something else besides, though she would not have been able to name the second thing precisely at that moment. He stopped at the end of the row and stood there for a moment, his back to her, looking out across her field. The corn was thin and pale this year. The fence along the far side needed new posts in 2 places. She knew what he was seeing because she saw it herself every morning. He turned around. "What are you asking for all of it together?" he said. She blinked. "Together. The whole lot, everything on the fence." She had not considered anyone buying the whole lot at once. She had priced each item individually and had assumed she would sell things piecemeal over however many days it took. She added the numbers in her head quickly, which she was good at, having always been the one in the household who kept the accounts. $9.40 would be the total if you took everything at the price I have written," she said. Raymond Atkins reached into the inside of his duster and produced a worn leather wallet. He counted out money with the deliberate accuracy of a man who does not miscount and does not need to recount, and he held it out to her. She looked at what was in his hand. "That is $12, she said. "9.40 for the tools," he said. "$2.60 because you have been sitting out here in this wind since sunup, and that earns a man's respect." She looked at the money and then looked at him, and felt the particular pride that a woman in her position has to wrestle with constantly. The pride that wants to refuse charity, and the practical understanding that this money was the difference between keeping her daughter fed through October and not. "I did not ask for charity," she said. "No," he said. "You did not. You asked a fair price and I paid it, and the rest is between me and my conscience, which is not your concern." He said it without harshness, with the matter-of-fact quality of a man stating a plain truth, and something about the plainness of it took the ground out from under her objection. She took the money. Her fingers brushed his palm as she did, and the contact, small as it was, went through her like a tuning fork struck against a table edge. "Thank you," she said. She folded the money and placed it in the pocket of her apron. "I will need a few minutes to find something to wrap the smaller pieces. I have some cloth in the wagon." "Take your time," he said. He had already turned back to the tools, beginning to organize them into groups by size, and the efficiency of the gesture was so natural and unassuming that she had gone 3 steps toward her wagon before she realized that she had smiled. The first real smile she had produced in 4 months. She was not sure what to do with that information, so she kept walking. When she came back with the cloth and the rope, Raymond Atkins had the tools grouped and ready in a way that was already more organized than the original presentation had been. He had laid the largest pieces together, wrapped the small blade tools in a neat bundle, and placed the chisels with their handles aligned. "You have done some carpentry," she said. "Some," he said. "My father was a joiner in Virginia before the war. I grew up in the shop more than I grew up in the house." "Virginia," she said. "That is far from Kansas." "Most things are far from Kansas," he said, and there was a dry quality in it that almost caught her off guard, and she found herself briefly on the edge of a laugh before grief's gravitational pull brought her back. He saw the near laugh and the pull back, and the gray eyes registered both, and he did not push. They worked together, wrapping and securing the tools, and she was aware of the oddness of it, working beside a stranger on a roadside in Kansas. The way their hands sometimes moved toward the same piece at the same time, and then one of them redirected, the wordless negotiation of shared work. It had been a long time since she had worked beside anyone. Thomas had been gone, and then after Thomas was gone there was only her, doing everything alone, and she had become so practiced at the solitude that the presence of another person doing something alongside her had a quality that was almost overwhelming. "Where will you take them?" she asked, as they tied off the last knot. "Wichita, most likely," he said. "I know a man who runs a carpentry shop on the south side of the river. He will buy good tools at a fair price and put them to good use." She looked at the bundle of tools sitting in the dust beside the fence, wrapped in her cloth and tied with her rope, ready to be loaded onto the bay horse or perhaps a pack arrangement she had not yet seen. Something moved in her chest that she recognized as the last letting go. She had thought it would feel worse than this. She had thought it would feel like watching Thomas leave a second time, but it did not feel exactly like that. It felt different, more complicated, as though the tools were going somewhere they would be used, which was what Thomas would have wanted for them. He would be glad of that, she said. Thomas, he would not have wanted them sitting in a barn. "Then you did right by him bringing them out here," Raymond said. He straightened up and looked at her, and again there was that quality of full attention, the kind she had not encountered very often in her life, the kind that made a person feel that they were the most important thing in the immediate landscape. "Is the farm going to be all right?" The question was direct in the way of a person who sees through the polite surface of things to the actual reality underneath, and she could have deflected it. She had deflected similar questions from her neighbors, from the minister, from Thomas's cousin who had come to pay respects, and then looked at the fields in a way that meant he was assessing them for acquisition. She could have said yes, everything is fine, thank you for asking, but she did not. There are back taxes, she said. The money will help, but I am not certain it will be enough. I am hoping to bring in enough from the kitchen garden to carry us through winter, and in the spring I plan to plant the east field in wheat. But the honest answer to your question is that I do not know. He looked at her for a long moment. How much are the taxes? That is not your concern, she said, and she said it gently but firmly, because there was a line and she had already let him overpay for the tools without objecting too strenuously, and the line was somewhere before a stranger paid her tax bill. Fair enough, he said. He looked at the farm again, at the thin corn and the fence that needed work, and she saw something working in his expression, some internal calculation she could not read. I will load these up and be out of your way. He loaded the tools efficiently, using a pack arrangement on the bay horse that she saw he had tied out on a second, smaller sorrel horse that had apparently been trailing behind him, and which she had not noticed in the first confusion of his arrival. The sorrel was led by a lead rope attached to the bay's saddle horn, and the pack saddle on the sorrel was well made and clearly much used. He distributed the weight of the tools across the sorrel's pack saddle with the practiced ease of a man who has done this kind of work 1,000 times. When he was done, he turned to face her from the roadside, and she was still standing by the fence in the wind, one hand up to keep a strand of dark hair from blowing across her eyes. "Mrs. Graves," he said. "Mr. Atkins," she said. Something moved in his face that was not quite a smile but was in the neighborhood of one. "I hope the spring is kinder to you than this year has been," he said. "Thank you," she said. "I hope your ride to Wichita is uneventful." He touched his hat brim. He gathered the bay's reins and stepped up into the saddle, and the sorrel came alongside with the loaded pack, and Raymond Atkins turned south on the stage road and rode away. Lydia stood by the fence and watched him until the road bent and he was no longer visible, and then she stood there a little longer anyway, looking at the bend in the road. Then she gathered the chalk boards and the empty fence space that the tools had occupied and drove her wagon back up to the farmhouse to tell Clara that breakfast would be late this morning. Clara was up and dressed when Lydia came in, sitting at the kitchen table with a book that Mrs. Hendricks, the schoolteacher, had lent her, her dark hair in 2 braids that she had managed entirely herself, which was a source of enormous pride to Clara and a source of considerable admiration to Lydia, who had been 10 before she could braid hair without making a disaster of it. "Did you sell them?" Clara asked. She looked up from her book with eyes that were Thomas's eyes, brown and direct and always asking the real question. "All of them," Lydia said. "A man came and bought everything together." Clara absorbed this. Was he nice? Lydia moved to the stove and began building up the fire for breakfast. He was respectful, she said, which was the honest answer. Whether nice was the right word for a man who paid $2.60 more than the asking price without being asked to, she was not entirely sure. "That is good," Clara said, and returned to her book. Lydia stood at the stove and waited for the fire to take, and she thought about gray eyes and the way a stranger's hands had moved through Thomas's tools as if they already knew them. It was 3 days later when she heard horses on the south road and looked out the kitchen window to see 2 horses coming up her farm road, the bay and the sorrel, and Raymond Atkins sitting on the bay with the sorrel on a lead behind him, and on the sorrel's pack saddle, wrapped in her own cloth and tied with her own rope, was the bundle of Thomas's tools. She was out on the porch before she had decided to be, one hand on the post, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. He stopped the horses at the gate. He looked up at her on the porch, and there was something in his expression that was almost careful, the expression of a man who has done something and is not entirely certain how it will be received. "I went to Wichita," he said. "I can see that," she said. "You went to Wichita and you came back." "I took the tools to my man on the south side of the river," Raymond said. "He offered me $11 for the lot. I told him I would think about it." He paused. "Then I thought about it." Lydia looked at the bundle on the sorrel's back and felt something complicated assembling itself in her chest. "Mr. Atkins," she said slowly, "did you bring Thomas's tools back?" "I did," he said. She came down off the porch steps and walked to the gate. She stood on her side of it and looked up at him on the horse. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone who does not have an answer, but the quiet of someone choosing the right one. "Because I rode south for 2 hours and I kept thinking about a woman sitting alone in the wind on a fence post, trying to put a number on what her husband left behind. And I thought about what that man in Wichita was going to do with a dead man's tools, and it sat wrong with me," he said. "I also thought that if your farm is going to pull through this hard season, there is repair work that wants doing on that fence and on what I suspect is the roof of that barn, and nobody to do it." She stared at him. "You came back to fix my fence. And the barn roof," he said, "if it needs it, and anything else that wants attention." The pride rose in her again, sharp and necessary. "I told you I did not want charity." "It is not charity," he said. He met her eyes steadily. "I am asking to stay a few days and work for my board, which is a transaction, not a gift. You feed me, I fix what is broken. That is how it works on every working farm in Kansas." She studied him. He returned the study without flinching, without looking away, simply meeting her eyes with that quiet gray directness that she was beginning to understand was simply the particular quality of Raymond Atkins, the way some men were loud and some men were nervous and some men were shifty, and this man was simply still. "Clara is here," she said. "My daughter, she is 9. "I know," he said. "You mentioned her." "I did not mention her," she said. "I do not think I mentioned her." "You mentioned that you were hoping to carry through the winter," he said. "No woman talks about carrying through the winter alone unless there is someone else she is carrying through it for." That was a careful, observant thing to say, and it unsettled her, and the unsettling was not unpleasant. "You can put the horses in the paddock," she said. "Supper is at 6. She turned and walked back to the porch, and she was aware of him watching her go, and she was aware that she was aware, and she climbed the porch steps and went back into the kitchen and stood at the sink for a long moment with her hands flat on the counter, not doing anything, just standing. Clara appeared in the doorway from the back room with the look of a child who has heard everything through the window and is processing it at a high speed. "Is that the man who bought the tools?" Clara said. "He brought them back," Lydia said. Clara considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Why?" "He says he wants to fix the fence." Clara went to the window and looked out at Raymond Atkins leading his horses toward the paddock, his duster pushed back from the saddle, the sorrel with its bundle of returned tools ambling alongside. "He is very tall," Clara said. "Clara," Lydia said. "What he is?" Lydia started cutting cornbread. "Go finish your reading." The first day, Raymond fixed the south fence. He worked from after breakfast until the light began to fail, pulling old posts, tamping new ones, running fresh wire that he had brought with him on the sorrel's pack without anyone asking. Lydia watched from the kitchen window intermittently, and did not watch from the kitchen window the rest of the time, or so she told herself. She brought him water at noon, and he thanked her without stopping what he was doing, which she found she respected more than she would have respected him stopping. At supper the first night, Clara asked him where he had come from, and he said Virginia originally, and more recently Dodge City, and before that several places in between. And Clara asked what Dodge City was like, and he gave her a considered, honest answer about a town that was trying to become something more settled than it had been and finding the process difficult. And Clara listened with the focus she gave to things she found genuinely interesting, which was not everything, but when it was something. It was complete. "Did you ever see a real gunfight?" Clara asked. "Clara," Lydia said. "I have seen men argue with guns," Raymond said, "which is different from the way it gets described in the dime novels. In the novels it is very dramatic. In real life it is mostly very fast and very sad, and the men who survive it are generally not proud of it." Clara absorbed this with characteristic seriousness. "Papa never owned a gun," she said. "He was a carpenter," Lydia said quietly. A man who can make something with his hands has no need to be interested in the other business, Raymond said. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Do you know how to make things? She asked. Some things, he said. Not like your father from what your mother tells me, but some things. Later, after Clara was in bed, Lydia sat on the porch in the cooling air and Raymond Atkins came and sat on the step below her, leaning back against the post, and they sat in the quiet together for a while. There was a coyote calling somewhere to the east, and the stars over Kansas were the kind that required you to reconsider your sense of scale. Thomas built this porch, Lydia said eventually. She said it because the silence had been good, but she had begun to want words in it. It is well built, Raymond said. I checked the boards when I came in. The joinery under the rail is mortise and tenon. He did not take shortcuts. No, she said, he never did. What was he like? Raymond asked. It was the question that people had been afraid to ask her, in the weeks after the funeral, in the way that people are afraid to say the name of the dead as though saying it will summon grief rather than acknowledging it. She had not been asked in a long time, and the asking of it loosened something in her. He was steady, she said. Not exciting, not dramatic, not the kind of man who turned heads. But steady in the way that a good post is steady, the kind of solid you only appreciate after you have leaned on it long enough. He never raised his voice. He never made a promise he did not keep. He loved Clara so specifically, not just the idea of a daughter, but her in particular, the exact person she was. She paused. I miss the specific things about him more than the general thing. That is how it goes, Raymond said. When my mother died, my father said the same kind of thing. He said he missed the sound of her particular laugh, not laughter in general. Your father sounds like a man with understanding, she said. He was, Raymond said. He has been gone 8 years. They sat in the quiet again, and the coyote called again, and the stars did their business overhead. What keeps you moving? She asked. She meant it genuinely, curiously, not as a criticism. He was quiet for a moment. After the war, I came back to Virginia and my father's shop, and I worked there for 2 years, and I thought that would be the rest of it. Then my father died and the shop went to debt, and I came west because west was where a man could still make something of himself without the weight of everything that had already happened. He paused. I have been west for 8 years now. I work cattle drives when the season is right and other work in between. I am not avoiding something. I am just not finding a reason to stop. Until today, she said, and she meant the fence, but she knew when she said it that it could mean other things. He turned and looked up at her from the step, and in the starlight his gray eyes were very clear. Until today, he said. She looked back at him and felt the complicated thing in her chest do something that was not grief for the first time in 4 months, and it frightened her, and she recognized it, and she did not know what to do with it. She said good night and went inside. The second day he found the barn roof as he had predicted. It was not catastrophic, but it wanted significant work, and he spent the whole of the second day up on the roof, with tools he had to borrow back from the bundle on the sorrel, because she had sold them to him, which was a fact so strange and circular that it made her smile when she thought about it. He worked with Thomas's tools on Thomas's barn, and did not seem to think there was anything particular about this, though she watched him handle each tool with the same care that Thomas had handled them, and she thought that Thomas would have been all right with that. Clara brought him a piece of cold cornbread at 10 in the morning and stood below looking up at him on the roof with the assessing expression she brought to everything. You know what you are doing, Clara called up. Your compliments are generous, he called back. It was not a compliment, Clara said. It was an observation. Compliments are about things you have no control over. Competence you did yourself. He stopped what he was doing and looked down at her. That is a sophisticated distinction, he said. My mother taught me, Clara said, and went back to the house. He told Lydia about it that evening at supper, and the way he told it, with the precise recreation of Clara's delivery and the expression of a man who had found something unexpectedly admirable, made Lydia laugh for the first time since she could remember. The laugh surprised her. She put her hand over her mouth for a moment, not in embarrassment, but because the feeling of it was slightly strange, like a muscle that had gone unused for too long and was finding its old function again. Raymond smiled. It was the first full smile she had seen from him, and it changed his face substantially, cut the seriousness of it, and revealed something younger and warmer underneath, something that she suspected he did not show very often. "You have a good laugh," he said. She removed her hand from her mouth. "I forgot I had one," she said. Clara looked between them with the radar of a 9-year-old and returned serenely to her supper. By the end of the third day, the roof was sound and the fence was tight, and Raymond had also, without being asked, rehung the barn door that had been dragging since August, reset the hinge on the paddock gate, and cleaned the stone of the well, which had been gathering moss at the lip. He did this work with the particular satisfaction of a man who is very good at physical work, and who finds genuine contentment in the doing of it, not in the completion so much as in the process, the solving of each small mechanical problem as it presented itself. On the evening of the third day he came in for supper, and he was quiet through most of the meal, and Lydia could feel him thinking and said nothing because she had learned that some thinking needed its room. After supper, while Clara was washing the plates, he said, "I should probably be moving south tomorrow." The kitchen was very quiet suddenly. "Wichita," she said. "Or some work I can find," he said. "There is usually something." She looked at her hands on the table. She was aware of Clara's very deliberate plate washing behind her, the particular quality of a child pretending not to be listening. "I see," she said. "The roof will hold through winter," he said. "The fence is solid." "The gate is, I know what you fixed," she said quietly. "I saw it all." He looked at her and she looked at him, and the kitchen was warm from the stove, and outside the Kansas evening was doing its violet best against the darkening sky. "Mrs. Graves," he said. "Lydia." The use of her first name was deliberate and careful, and she felt it as such. "Yes," she said. "I find myself in the unusual position of not wanting to leave a place," he said. "That has not happened to me in quite some time, and I am not entirely sure what to do with it." She was quiet for a moment. "You could stay," she said. She said it very simply, because the truth was simple even when the situation around it was complicated. "There is always work on a farm, and I cannot pretend otherwise. I can pay you fairly through the fall and into winter if the garden does what I hope it will, and in the spring if we plant the east field in wheat. I am not asking to be a farmhand," he said. She looked up at him. His jaw was set and his gray eyes were direct, and he had the expression of a man who is about to say something difficult and has committed to saying it. "Then what are you asking?" she said. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a small object and set it on the table between them. It was the small folding rule that Thomas always kept in his breast pocket, the one with the brass hinges worn thin from use, the one she had been crying over the morning she laid the tools out. She stared at it. "When I wrapped up the tools to bring them back," he said, "I found this in the bundle. I was not sure you had meant to sell it or whether it had gotten mixed in by accident. I held onto it to return it to you personally." She picked it up with both hands. The brass hinges were cold and familiar and perfect. "You came back to return a folding rule," she said. Her voice was unsteady. "No," he said quietly. "I came back because I could not think of a single sufficient reason not to." Clara set down the last plate on the shelf with a small deliberate clink, dried her hands on the kitchen cloth, and said, "I am going to go read," in the tone of a person who has concluded her obligations, and she went to the back room and the curtain swung shut behind her. Lydia held the folding rule in both hands and looked at Raymond Atkins across the supper table. "I am still grieving," she said. "I want you to understand that. I am not finished grieving." "I know," he said. "I am not asking you to be finished. I have a daughter and a farm with debts and a kitchen garden that may or may not make it through the fall," she said. "I know that too," he said. "I have been here 3 days and I have been paying attention." "Why?" she said. "Why would a man with no reason to stop choose this particular stopping point?" He was quiet for a moment, and the quiet was the careful kind. "My father used to say that some men look for the right place their whole lives and some men stumble into it, and the finding is the same either way, he said. I have been many places in 8 years, and I have never once felt the particular feeling I had sitting on your porch step 2 nights ago, listening to you talk about your husband, and I will not pretend otherwise. She sat with that for a moment. You might stay and find that this is harder than it looks, she said. A farm in debt, a widow, a 9-year-old girl who will ask you difficult questions every day. The questions I can manage, he said. The difficulty is not a disqualification. She looked at him for a long moment and thought about steady men and what they were worth and what the world was like when they were gone. Stay the week, she said. After the week we will see. He held her eyes. After the week we will see, he agreed. He stayed the week. During those days, a rhythm formed between them that had the quality of something that had existed before either of them invented it, as though the farm and the routine had a shape that they simply fit into together. He was up before her each morning, which surprised her, already at the stove making coffee by the time she came through the kitchen. She did not ask him to do this, and he offered no explanation for it. It simply happened, and she found that the smell of coffee when she came downstairs in the dark was one of the most restorative things she had encountered in recent memory. She showed him the east field and explained what she wanted to plant in the spring, walking the boundary with him in the late afternoon light, the dry corn stalks brittle and golden around them. He listened and occasionally asked questions that were practical and specific, the questions of a man who understood the mechanics of farming even if he had not been a farmer, and she found herself talking about the soil and the drainage and the line of trees to the north that blocked the worst of the wind with an enthusiasm she had not felt about the farm since Thomas died. The soil is good here, he said, crouching and taking up a handful from the furrow edge. This field should do well in wheat. Thomas always said so too, she said. He just never had the resources to plant it. We were always going to do it next year. Raymond let the soil fall from his hand and stood up. Next year is going to be different, he said. It was a simple thing to say, and he said it simply, but she heard in it something that was a commitment rather than a comfort, and the distinction mattered enormously. On the 5th day, 3 men rode up the farm road in the middle of the afternoon. Lydia was in the garden and Raymond was working on shoring up the root cellar door, and he saw them first and came to where she was standing with the same unhurried care he brought to everything. "Do you know those men?" he said quietly. She looked up at the 3 riders and felt a cold, particular recognition. "The one in front is Mr. Doyle," she said. "He is the county land agent. He was here 3 weeks ago with the tax notice. And the other 2. I do not know them," she said. Mr. Doyle was a neat, pinched man in a wool coat inappropriate to the weather, mounted on a clean, dark horse that had clearly never been ridden hard. He drew up at the garden gate and looked at Raymond with the focused displeasure of a man encountering something he had not planned for. "Mrs. Graves," he said. He did not look at her when he said it. He was still looking at Raymond. "Mr. Doyle," she said. "The October payment on the back taxes was due yesterday," Doyle said. He produced a folded document from his coat. "As discussed." "I have the first payment," Lydia said. "I have been gathering the funds." She had $12 from the sale of the tools plus what remained of her household cash, which together made $14.20. The first installment that Doyle had outlined 3 weeks ago was $12. She had exactly enough. "I will need to see it," Doyle said. Raymond stood beside her and said nothing. She was aware of him the way you are aware of something solid at your back. She went to the house and came back with $14.20 in the cash tin. She counted out $12 and put it on the gate post. Doyle counted it in turn and made a note in a small book and issued a receipt that he produced from the same coat pocket as the document. The 2 men behind him had not moved or spoken. "The second installment will be due in December," Doyle said. $12 again. "If it is not received by the 15th of December, the property goes to lien." "I understand," Lydia said. Doyle looked at Raymond again with the assessing quality of a man trying to determine the nature of a variable he had not factored. "Is this man employed on your property, Mrs. Graves?" "He is," Lydia said. Raymond looked at Doyle with the gray-eyed steadiness that she was coming to understand as his particular form of emphasis, the kind of look that was perfectly civil and simultaneously communicated a great deal. Doyle made another note, folded his book away, and turned his horse back down the road. The two men followed without ever having spoken. Raymond watched them until they reached the road junction and turned north. $12 in December, he said. "Yes," she said. "That is manageable," he said. "If the garden holds and the two hens you still have not sold turn over regular eggs, and if I take some work in town over November." She turned and looked at him. "You are planning November," she said. He met her eyes. "I told you I wanted to stay." She held the remaining $2.20 in the cash tin and looked at this man who had arrived on a bay horse from the north and had bought her husband's tools and brought them back and fixed her roof and her fence and her gate and rehung her barn door and was now planning November. "You told me after the week we would see," she said. "I have seen," he said. The week became 2 weeks, and 2 weeks became a month, and somewhere in the middle of October, Lydia Graves stopped counting the days in the resigned arithmetic of someone waiting for something to end, and started living in them. There were evenings on the porch as the air went cold where they sat wrapped in separate blankets and talked about everything. About her childhood in Missouri, about his time on the cattle drives, about the way the country was changing, and whether change was the right word for it, about books she had read and places he had seen. He had a particular way of listening, leaned slightly forward, elbows on his knees, as though the words coming toward him were worth leaning into, and she thought she could have gone on talking indefinitely simply because of the quality of his listening. One evening in late October, she brought out a bottle of cider that she had put up in August, and they sat with their tin cups and the sound of the wind in the dry corn and Clara asleep inside, and Raymond said, "Tell me something about Thomas that no one else knows." She thought about it seriously, because it was a serious question. "He used to sing when he thought no one could hear him," she said. "He had a perfectly adequate voice, but he was intensely embarrassed by it for reasons he never fully explained. He sang to the horses. He sang to the corn when he was planting." Clara caught him once and he went completely red from the collar to the hat brim, and she promised never to tell anyone, but she told me immediately. Raymond smiled, the full smile again, the one that changed his face. "What did he sing?" "Old songs mostly. His mother's songs." She held her cup in both hands. "I would hear him sometimes from the kitchen window, and I would not go out because I did not want him to stop." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "That is a man who was loved in the right way," he said. She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the person who loved him gave him room to be himself when he thought no one was watching. That is the right way." She sat with that and felt it settle into a true thing. "Were you ever married?" she asked. "No," he said. "I came close once in Abilene about 5 years back. A woman named Helen who was teaching school there. She was good and sensible, and I liked her a great deal." "What happened?" "She asked me to stay, and I could not tell her a reason to stay that was bigger than my reason to keep moving," he said. "So she found someone who could stay, and I went south, and I have thought about it a number of times since." "Do you regret it?" He looked at her steadily. "I regret that I could not give her what she needed," he said. "But if I had stayed in Abilene with Helen, I would not have been on the stage road north of Harlow Creek in September, and I find I am not able to regret that." The wind moved through the dry stalks with a long, papery sound. "Raymond," she said. It was the first time she had used his first name. He looked at her. "I do not know what this is yet," she said. "I want to be honest with you about that. I am still finding my way through the grief, and I am not ready to call this something with a name." "I know," he said. "I am not asking you to name it yet. But I do not want you to leave," she said. "That much I am sure of." He held her eyes for a long moment, and the wind was cold, and the stars were very many, and she felt in this moment the particular truth of her own heart, which was that Thomas Graves had been the best man she had known for 16 years, and this man sitting on her porch step was something she had not expected to encounter again in her life, and she was not going to send it away. "Then I will not leave," he said. November came in cold and productive. Raymond took work at the feed mill in Harlow Creek 3 days a week, working the grain lifts, which paid a wage modest but reliable. He gave Lydia half of what he earned without discussion, and she put it in the tin under the floor against the December payment. On the days he worked in town, he was back before supper, and Clara had taken to watching for the bay horse coming up the road with the particular focus of a child who will not admit that she is watching for it. One evening Raymond came back from town with a paper-wrapped parcel that he set on the table with the air of someone who has thought about something and then done it. "What is this?" Lydia said. "Open it," he said. Clara was at the table immediately. Lydia unwrapped the paper and found a small book, a collection of illustrated animal stories published in New York, and below it a length of blue ribbon, the good kind, wide and smooth. "The ribbon is for Clara's braids," he said, "if she wants it. The book is for both of you." Clara picked up the ribbon with both hands and held it up against the lamplight. "It is a very good blue," she said gravely. "I thought so," Raymond said. Lydia looked at the book and at the man who had brought it and felt something in her chest that was warm and specific and unambiguous, even if she was not ready to say the word for it. "Thank you," she said. He sat down to supper, and the three of them ate together in the warm kitchen, with the Kansas cold pressing at the windows, and the lamp making its circle of light over the table. And it was so ordinary and so complete that Lydia had to look down at her plate for a moment to compose herself. On a Sunday in the middle of November, Lydia drove to town to attend services, and Raymond came with her, because she asked him to, and Clara sat between them on the wagon seat. The church in Harlow Creek was a plain building with plain pine pews and a minister named Reverend Caulfield who was tall and mild, and delivered his sermons with the conviction of a man who genuinely believes what he is saying, which Lydia had always appreciated. Several of the congregation looked at Raymond with the frank assessment of small-town people encountering a new element in their environment. Mrs. Pollock, the pharmacist's wife, leaned to Mrs. Hendricks during the second hymn and said something that Lydia did not hear, but that made Mrs. Hendricks glance in their direction with a look of benign curiosity. After the service, Lydia introduced Raymond to Reverend Caulfield, who shook his hand and looked at him with the practiced evaluation of a man who has observed a great many people crossing his threshold. "Raymond Atkins," Caulfield said. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Atkins?" "Virginia, sir," Raymond said, "though I have been in Kansas some weeks now, working Mrs. Graves's farm." "I am," Raymond said. There was nothing defensive in how he said it. He said it the way a man states a fact he is comfortable with. Caulfield looked at Lydia and then back at Raymond with the expression of a man who sees more than he's asked about and chooses what to say with care. "It is good land," he said. "Thomas Graves worked it faithfully. I hope it treats you well." "I believe it will," Raymond said. Walking back to the wagon, Lydia said, "That was graciously done." "He is a man who cares about his congregation," Raymond said. He was not asking to be difficult, he was asking to understand. "And you do not mind being understood," she said. He helped her up to the wagon seat. His hand was warm through the fabric of her sleeve. "By people who ask cleanly, no," he said. They drove home through the November morning with Clara sitting between them reading the animal story book. And Lydia thought about understanding and what it meant to be known and found acceptable by someone who had bothered to look. December came, and with it the cold that had teeth in it and the early dark, and the day before the tax payment was due. Lydia counted the money in the tin under the floor, and found that, with Raymond's contributions and the egg money and the last of the garden proceeds, she had $14.80 set against the $12 requirement, which left $2.80 for December's household expenses, which was thin but possible. She paid the tax on the 15th of December through the county office in Harlow Creek, getting a receipt from the clerk, a young man who looked barely old enough to be behind a desk. And when she came out of the office building into the cold, she found Raymond waiting by the wagon with 2 cups of hot coffee from the bakery across the street, and she was so unexpectedly moved by this small fact that she stood on the steps for a moment before she could make herself walk down. She took the coffee and they stood by the wagon in the December cold, and she said, "The tax is paid." "Good," he said. "We are clear until spring," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at him in his duster with the scarf she had given him last week wrapped at his collar, the one she had found in Thomas's trunk of winter things, a good wool scarf that she had decided Thomas would have given to a man who needed it and whose intentions were sound. She had given it to Raymond, and he had taken it the same way he took everything from her, without making it large and without diminishing it. "Raymond," she said. "Lydia," he said. "I know what this is now," she said. "I said in October I was not ready to name it, and now I am ready." He was very still. "I love you," she said. She said it the way she said true things, directly and without decoration. "I love you, and I am not confused about whether I am saying it too soon or whether it is the grief speaking, or whether Thomas would have wanted this. I have thought about all of those things, and I have come to my conclusions, and the conclusion is that I love you." He stood there for one long moment, and something crossed his face that was not quite composure, and not quite its absence, but the space between them where a man is honestly feeling something and allowing himself to feel it. He reached out and took her free hand in his. "I love you," he said. "I have been in love with you since you were sitting on a fence post in the wind with your hair coming loose, telling me that a good tool outlasts the man who owned it." She looked at him. "That was the first thing I said to you." "I know," he said. He was not smiling, not yet, but she could hear it in his voice. "I am aware that is a short time by any reasonable standard." "And yet," she said. "And yet," he said. She stepped forward and closed the distance between them, and he took her face in both his cold hands and kissed her in the street in Harlow Creek, Kansas, in December of 1878, and it tasted like coffee and cold air, and something she had not expected to have again, and she let herself have it completely. Across the street through the bakery window, two women who she recognized as Mrs. Pollock and Mrs. Hendricks were watching with expressions of undisguised delight, and she did not mind this even slightly. She came home and told Clara. Clara sat on the kitchen chair with her hands in her lap and her Thomas Brown eyes very serious. "You love him," Clara said. It was a statement, not a question. "Yes," Lydia said. Clara was quiet for a moment. "Does he know?" "I told him this afternoon," Lydia said. "What did he say?" "He told me he loved me too," Lydia said. Clara absorbed this with the full weight of her 9 years. "I think he is a good man," she said finally. "I think Papa would have thought so too, because Papa always liked people who knew how to do things with their hands and who did not show off about it." Lydia crossed the kitchen and took her daughter's face in her hands. "Thomas would have liked him very much," she said. "I believe that entirely," Clara nodded. "Are you going to get married?" "That is a conversation that hasn't happened yet," Lydia said. "But it might," Clara said. "It might," Lydia said. It happened on a Thursday evening in January when the snow was coming down outside in the serious flat way that Kansas snow comes down, covering the fields in a particular hush. Raymond had been into town for his mill work and come back to find supper ready and Clara doing her arithmetic at the table and the farm sitting in its winter state of patient waiting. And they had eaten and Clara had gone to bed, and they had sat by the stove together, and he had said, in the careful and direct way of a man who has thought about something long enough, "I would like to ask you to marry me, Lydia. I want to ask it properly. I want to ask it with the intention of staying here on this farm with you and Clara, and working this land and building a life that is genuinely a life, not a passage between one place and another. I want to ask knowing that you love Thomas Graves and that what you had with him was real and good, and I am not asking you to replace it or forget it, only to let something new be real alongside it." She was looking at the stove. The light from the fire around the door was the color of embers. "Yes," she said. "I have not asked yet," he said. "Yes," she said again, and turned to look at him with the full smile that Clara had told her several weeks ago had come back, that the smile that had been missing for months was back, and Clara was very glad about it. And Raymond Atkins looked at Lydia Graves by the light of the stove fire in January of 1879, and understood with the absolute clarity that only comes to a person occasionally in their life that he had found the place he had been moving toward without knowing it through 8 years of prairie and cattle and open road. He took her hand. She let him hold it. They were married in March of 1879 in the church in Harlow Creek, on a morning when the last of the winter was breaking, and the sky over the Kansas plains was the pale gold of early spring. Reverend Caulfield performed the ceremony with his characteristic plain sincerity. Clara stood beside her mother in a blue dress, the exact color of the ribbon Raymond had brought her in November, her dark braids neat, holding a small bunch of early prairie flowers she had found that morning along the south fence. The congregation that attended was modest: the Hendricks, the Pollocks, a few farming families from the surrounding area who had come to know Raymond over the winter months through the feed mill, and through the easy way he had of talking to people that did not distinguish between important and unimportant. At the ceremony's conclusion, when Reverend Caulfield indicated that Raymond might kiss his bride, Clara said from her position beside her mother, in a stage whisper that carried clearly to the front pew, "It is about time." Several people laughed. Raymond Atkins kissed Lydia Graves, who was now Lydia Atkins, while Clara watched with the expression of a person who is deeply satisfied with the outcome of events and has been for some time. They had a small celebration at the farm after, tables brought outside because the day was mild enough, and some of the neighboring families brought food and someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing on the tramped-down earth in front of the barn. And Lydia danced with her husband for the first time in years, because Thomas had not enjoyed dancing and she had not pushed him. And she discovered that Raymond Atkins had learned to dance somewhere between Virginia and Kansas and was extremely good at it. And she told him so. "My mother insisted," he said, turning her neatly under his arm. "She said a man who cannot dance is only half civilized." "Your mother sounds like she was a very practical woman," Lydia said. "She would have liked you a great deal," he said. Clara danced with Mr. Hendricks, who was 60 and stout but enthusiastic, and then she danced by herself for a while because the music was good, and she saw no reason to require a partner to enjoy it, which was entirely characteristic. Spring came fully, and Raymond and Lydia planted the east field in wheat. They worked the field together, Raymond behind the plow with Porter the mule and Lydia walking the turned furrows with the seed bag. And the work was hard and physical and deeply satisfying in the way of things that are both difficult and right. Clara helped where she could and spent the rest of the time doing what 9-year-old girls do in spring fields, which is largely to investigate everything at ground level with ferocious scientific attention. One afternoon in April, Lydia was sitting on the porch resting her feet after a full day in the field, and Raymond came and sat beside her, not on the step this time but on the chair next to hers, the closeness of a person who is now allowed to be close, and he had a look she had come to recognize as the look he had when he wanted to say something and was organizing it. "What is it?" she said. "Thomas's tools," he said. She looked at him. The tools were in the barn. She had not known what to do with them after he brought them back, and they had stayed in the barn through the fall and winter, wrapped in her cloth, untouched. "I would like to use them," he said. "If you will allow it, I would like to use them to build a room onto the east side of the house." "Why?" she said, though she was beginning to understand. "Because Clara is 9, he said, "and she will be 10 and then she will be 11, and she needs her own room, and the house has the space along the east wall to add one well." Lydia looked at the east side of the house. "You are going to build it with Thomas's tools," she said. "With your permission," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said slowly, "that there is something fitting about that." "I think so too," he said. "He would have built it himself eventually," she said, "if he had had more time." "I know," Raymond said. "That is exactly why I want to use his tools to do it." She looked at him for a long moment with everything she felt for him right there in her face, not hidden, not qualified. "Use the tools," she said. He built the room through May and into June, working on it in the evenings after the field work was done, using Thomas's tools with the same careful, competent attention he brought to everything. Clara supervised with characteristic thoroughness, occasionally holding boards in place and asking detailed questions about joinery that Raymond answered in full, because she deserved full answers. The room took shape slowly and beautifully, with mortise and tenon joints and proper window framing and a door that hung straight and true. When it was done, Clara walked into it and stood in the center and turned slowly around, and then she sat down on the bare floor in the middle of the room and looked at the walls and the ceiling and the window with its view of the east field, the wheat coming green and strong, and she said, very quietly, "Papa would have built it exactly this way." Raymond stood in the doorway and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would improve on the moment. That night, after Clara was asleep in her new room, Lydia and Raymond sat on the porch in the June warmth, and she leaned against his shoulder and he put his arm around her and they looked out at the fields in the long summer evening. "She is right," Lydia said. "You built it the way he would have." "I tried to," Raymond said. "The plans he left in the barn, had you seen them?" She lifted her head. "What plans?" On the back of a piece of leather in the barn behind the tool cabinet, he had drawn out a room addition on the east side, same dimensions I used. The window in the same place. He was quiet for a moment. "I found them when I was measuring the wall." Lydia sat with this for a long time, looking at the evening. "He was planning it," she said. "He was planning it," Raymond said. She leaned back against his shoulder. "Thank you," she said. She meant it for the room. She meant it for the tools he had brought back. She meant it for every day since September, when a tall man on a bay horse had stopped at her fence and picked up a mortise chisel and found the balance in it. She meant all of it in one word. "Thank you," he said back, and meant the same totality. The wheat harvest in August was good. Not exceptional, not the yield of a spectacular year, but the kind of solid, respectable yield that justified the decision to plant, and that paid the remaining tax debt in full with enough left to carry the farm comfortably into the fall. Lydia paid the final installment at the county office in August, and when the clerk produced the receipt, she folded it and put it in her pocket and stood on the steps of the county building and breathed the summer air of a debt-free afternoon. Raymond had come with her and he was waiting at the wagon, and when she came down the steps with the look on her face, he knew what it meant without being told. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He caught her hand as she reached the wagon and pulled her close and kissed her in the street again without apparent concern for public observation, and the clerk, who had followed to the door to watch, said something to the young woman behind the second desk that made her laugh. In the fall of 1879, Lydia discovered she was with child. She told Raymond on a Sunday morning after Clara had gone to the neighbor's farm to spend the afternoon with the Henderson girls, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood the way she had stood at the sink on the first day. He came back with the tools, not doing anything, just being present with a fact. He was sitting across from her and she said, "Raymond," in the tone she used when she was about to say something real, and he set down his coffee cup and gave her his full attention. "I'm going to have a baby," she said. He looked at her. His face went through several things in rapid succession, all of them visible, all of them genuine, and landed on something that was purely illuminated. "Are you well?" he said. It was the first thing he asked. Not an exclamation, not a display. Just the first practical and most important question. "I am very well," she said. He reached across the table and took her hands in his. "Lydia," he said. "Yes," she said. He stood up and came around the table and took her face in his hands the way he had in December on the street in Harlow Creek. And she looked at him and saw a man who had been moving across the country for 8 years, looking for a reason to stop, and had found it, and who was now being given more reason still, and whose face said that this was the most that he had expected from a life and more. He kissed her gently and sat back down and picked up his coffee cup, and then set it down again, because he could not drink coffee at a moment like this. And she laughed, and the laugh was completely free and completely present. Clara was told when she came back from the Henderson farm, dusty and cheerful and full of news about the Henderson girl's new colt. Lydia and Raymond told her together, sitting on the porch in the September evening. Clara's face went through its own series of calculations. "A brother or a sister," she said. "One or the other," Raymond confirmed. Clara looked at Lydia. "Which do you hope for?" "A healthy child," Lydia said. "That is the hope." "But if you are hoping," Clara pressed. Lydia smiled. "Then I have no preference." Clara looked at Raymond. "Which do you hope for?" "A healthy child," Raymond said. Clara gave him the look she gave things that were not fully satisfying. "A brother would be interesting," she said, with the tone of someone reporting a scientific finding. "I have never had a brother. I believe I could be useful to a brother." "I believe you could too," Raymond said. She went inside to wash before supper, and he and Lydia looked at each other with the shared warmth of parents who have been given an accounting of what was expected of the universe, and found it both predictable and delightful. The winter of 1879 and into the spring of 1880 was the fullest winter Lydia could remember since her childhood, full in the way of a house that has enough of everything, not abundance but sufficiency, enough warmth and enough food, and enough of the most important thing, which is people who know you and chose you. Raymond continued his work at the mill and on the farm, and in the evenings he built things, small things. A crib from pine lumber he bought in town, a rocking horse for the new baby that Clara had requested with the argument that all children needed a rocking horse, and she herself had never had one, and the new sibling would therefore be starting ahead. He made the rocking horse in evenings by lamplight, using Thomas's tools, and it was a good horse, well-proportioned and smooth, painted a deep chestnut with a real horsehair mane that he had gotten from the barber in town who kept hair for stuffing. In the spring, there was also the matter of planting again, and this time they had the money to plant more of the east field and to add a section of the north field in addition, and Raymond had plans for the next season that were beginning to take the shape of a prosperous farm rather than a struggling one. Mrs. Hendricks came by in the spring to bring Clara new reading books and stayed for coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Lydia, who was large with the coming baby and moving through her days with the equanimity of a woman who has been through hard things and knows that the body is capable. "You look well," Mrs. Hendricks said. "I am well," Lydia said. "He is a good man," Mrs. Hendricks said, with the directness of a schoolteacher who has decided to say what she thinks. "He is the best man I know," Lydia said. "That is a full statement, and I mean it entirely." Mrs. Hendricks nodded with satisfaction. "Thomas was a fine man," she said. "And if he had to leave you, I am glad the world sent you this one." Lydia looked out the kitchen window to where Raymond was in the north field turning soil, the mule moving steadily, the man steady behind it. "So am I," she said. The baby came in May of 1880, a boy, arriving in the early morning hours when the sun was just beginning to come over the eastern ridge, and the doctor from Harlow Creek, old Dr. Marsh, who had delivered half the children in the county, pronounced him healthy and loud, which the child demonstrated immediately and at length. Raymond held his son for the first time sitting in the chair beside the bed, with Lydia propped on the pillows watching, and he held him with the careful precision of a man who is holding something that matters more than anything he has held before, and he looked at his son's face with the complete and focused attention that was the particular quality of Raymond Atkins applied to the most important thing it had ever been applied to. "He has your eyes," he said to Lydia. "He has your chin," she said. "What will we call him?" Raymond asked. They had discussed names for months and had made no final decision, which had been Clara's chief frustration with the whole process. "Thomas," Lydia said. She said it simply and completely. Raymond looked up from the baby. "Thomas Raymond Atkins," she said. "If you are willing. Thomas for the man who built this farm and loved this family and left behind tools good enough to be worth bringing back. Raymond for the man who brought them." He looked at her for a long moment with his son in his arms, and the morning light coming through the window, and his face did the thing it sometimes did where it was too full to be readable, and she had learned that this was how Raymond Atkins looked when something was too true to perform. "Thomas Raymond Atkins," he said. "Yes," she said. Clara appeared in the bedroom doorway, having been asleep in her room and apparently woken by the sounds of the morning's business, her dark braids loose from sleep, wearing her white nightgown, her brown eyes sharp and alert. "Is he here?" she said. "He is here," Raymond said. Clara crossed the room with the dignity of a person of 9 who is about to be a person of 10 in 6 weeks and who takes her responsibilities seriously. She looked at the baby in Raymond's arms with the assessing thoroughness that she brought to everything. "He is very red," she said. "New people often are," Lydia said. "He is quite loud." "He is establishing himself," Raymond said. Clara considered this and found it adequate. She reached out one careful finger and touched her brother's hand, and his fingers curled around it with the reflexive, blind grip of the very new, and Clara's expression went from assessment to something entirely different, something unguarded and soft and slightly astonished. "Hello, Thomas," she said very quietly. The baby gripped her finger and was quiet for a moment. They stayed like that, the 4 of them, in the bedroom of the farmhouse that Thomas Graves had built, in the early morning of a spring day in 1880, and the light was good, and the wheat was growing in the east field, and the tools that had started this whole sequence of events were wrapped in cloth in the barn, having been used for the room that was Clara's and for the crib, and for 100 other good and necessary things, and they were waiting for the next use, because that was what good tools did. The summer of 1880 was the best the farm had seen in years. The wheat came in strong, the corn was full, the garden outperformed everything Lydia had hoped, and she spent August preserving in a manner that left the root cellar so well stocked that Raymond said it looked like they were expecting to be snowed in until approximately the following summer. In the evenings Raymond sometimes played with Thomas on the porch, the baby propped against his arm and looking at the wide Kansas sky with the concentrated blankness of a young person for whom everything is new information, and Clara would come and sit on the step and read aloud from whatever book she was currently reading. And sometimes Lydia would come and sit beside Raymond and lean her head against his shoulder and listen to Clara reading and the baby making his various small sounds, and the horses in the paddock and the coyotes in the east distance. She thought sometimes about the September morning she had sat on the fence post in the wind with her late husband's tools laid out along the fence and the grief of it, and the necessity of it, and what it had felt like to watch a stranger pick up a mortise chisel and find the balance in it. She thought about the $12 and the $2.60 extra, and the way his hands had moved through Thomas's things with respect. She thought about looking down the road after he rode away and standing there looking at the bend for longer than was strictly necessary. She had not known then. She had felt something, had recognized the quality of his attention and the steadiness of his presence, but she had not known what it would become. That was how the best things worked, she had come to believe. You did not plan them. You set yourself in the world and did what needed doing, and the best things arrived from the direction you were not looking. One evening in late August, when the harvest was in and the accounts were settled, and the farm was in the best position it had been in since she and Thomas had first purchased it, Raymond came in from the barn and found her sitting at the kitchen table with the folding rule in her hands, the small one with the brass hinges worn thin, the one he had kept to return to her personally. She had not been looking at it with grief. She had been looking at it with something more like gratitude, which was different in the way that looking ahead is different from looking back. He came and sat across from her, and she set the folding rule on the table between them. "I think about him," she said. "I want you to know that I think about him, not in the way that diminishes what we have, but I think about him." "I know," Raymond said. "I would think less of you if you did not." "Do you think that is strange?" she asked. "To love you and still carry him?" "No," he said. "I think it would be strange not to. He was here first and he was real, and he is the father of your daughter and the man who built this house. He does not get erased because I arrived." She looked at him. "You are very unusual," she said. "I have been told that," he said. "I mean it well," she said. "I know that too," he said. She slid the folding rule across the table to him. "Keep it," she said. "Use it. You build things, you need a rule. Use it the way it was meant to be used." He looked at it on the table. "Are you certain?" he said. "He would want it used," she said. "He told me so himself, in a manner of speaking. Every time he told me a good tool outlasts the man who owned it." Raymond picked up the folding rule and held it in his hand, and she saw on his face the same thing he had felt when she had agreed to marry him, the same full, unreadable expression that meant the feeling was genuine and large. He put it in his shirt pocket, the same pocket Thomas had always kept it, and he left it there. That September, 1 year to the month since a woman had laid her late husband's tools along a roadside in the Kansas wind, Raymond Atkins was in his barn in the early morning when Clara came running from the house to tell him that the Henderson family's barn had caught fire in the night, and the whole Henderson farm was in trouble. By the time he had the wagon hitched with timber and tools and was heading down the road, 3 other neighboring farm families had converged on the Henderson property, and the community of Harlow Creek did what communities in that time and place did when one of their members needed help. They showed up, and they built. Raymond worked with the Henderson men and the neighboring farmers all through that day and into the next, and it was in those 2 days of working beside strangers who became less strange that he understood finally and completely that he had stopped moving. Not in the way of someone who has given up on something, but in the way of a man who has arrived, who has found the coordinates of his own life and planted himself there with full knowledge. He came home the evening of the second day with sawdust in his beard and his hands sore and Thomas's tools wrapped clean, and returned to the barn. And Lydia was on the porch with Thomas the younger in her arms and Clara beside her on the step, and the September evening was the exact quality of a September evening 1 year before, the same slant of light, the same taste of coming autumn. He stopped the wagon at the gate and looked at them on the porch. She looked back at him. "The Henderson barn," she said. "Standing," he said. She smiled. The full smile, the one Clara had said, came back. He climbed down from the wagon and came through the gate and up the porch steps, and she moved over to make room, and he sat down beside her, and the baby reached for his face with both hands in the imperious manner of 8-month-olds, and he let himself be grabbed. "A year ago today," she said. "I was counting too," he said. Clara looked between them. "A year ago today was when he came and bought the tools," she said. "And brought them back," Lydia said. "And brought them back," Raymond said. The coyote called from the east again, same as always, and the stars were beginning to come through over the ridge. Thomas Raymond Atkins held his father's finger with both hands and found it satisfactory. Clara rested her chin on her knee and looked at the stars with the expression of someone doing large-scale thinking. The horses in the paddock moved through the dusk. Raymond put his arm around Lydia's shoulders, and she leaned into him, and the September dark came in slowly over the Kansas plains. And the farm, Thomas Graves's farm and Lydia Graves's farm and Raymond Atkins's farm, sat in the coming night like a lamp that had been lit and was not going out. 2 more years brought more seasons and another child, a second boy they named James, born in the spring of 1882, who arrived with Raymond's gray eyes and Lydia's dark hair, and who from the beginning had the quality that Clara described as extremely determined, by which she meant that James Raymond Atkins decided very early what he wanted from any given situation, and pursued it with an efficiency that she found both admirable and occasionally exhausting. Clara herself was 11 by the time James arrived, and had the room she loved and a collection of books that took up the whole of one wall and a rocking horse she had formerly outgrown, but kept anyway on the grounds that it was a fine piece of craftsmanship, which was true. The farm prospered. Not extravagantly, not in the way of people in novels who discover gold or inherit fortunes, but in the honest and complete way of a family that works hard on good land with clear intentions and doesn't lose sight of what they are working for. The wheat fields expanded to 3 sections. Raymond built a second, larger barn in the summer of 1882, using Thomas's tools and lumber from the mill where he had worked that first winter. And the barn was the finest structure on the property, solid and true, with the same mortise and tenon joinery in its frame that Thomas Graves had used on his porch. When it was done, Lydia walked through it with Raymond on a Sunday morning and ran her hand along the timber framing and said, "Thomas would have been proud of this barn." "Good," Raymond said. "That was the intention." She stopped and looked at him in the light coming through the new barn door. "Raymond," she said. "Lydia," he said. "I want you to know something," she said. "I want you to know that I have never regretted it, not any of it. Not the morning I laid those tools out on the fence, not the first day you came back, not the fear I had in November before I admitted what I felt, not a single day since." He looked at her the way he had looked at her the morning he brought Thomas the younger his rocking horse, the way he looked at things he found genuinely beautiful. "Neither have I," he said. "Not for a moment." She took his hand and they walked back out into the morning, and Clara was in the yard with baby James on a blanket, reading him a story from a picture book, with the serious pedagogical commitment of a person who has already decided that her brother will be educated regardless of his current level of comprehension. And James was listening with an attentiveness that suggested he was, in fact, comprehending more than expected. The Kansas morning was wide and clear. The wheat in the east field was the color of honey. The barn was new, and the fence was tight and the gate hung true. Thomas's tools were in the barn, hanging on the wall in the order that Thomas had always kept them and that Raymond had maintained, each one polished and sharp, each one used and cared for, and ready for the next thing it would be asked to do. The folding rule with the brass hinges worn thin was in Raymond Atkins's shirt pocket, where it had lived for 2 years now, measuring out the dimensions of a life that had turned out to be exactly the right size.